Hello and welcome back to Storytime with Eric Zimmer. Last time I read the introduction to Sagamore Hill, Theodore Roosevelt's Summer White House by Bill Bleyer. Now we're gonna start with the beginning of the story in Chapter 1, when the Roosevelts first came to Oyster Bay. So you ready? Alright, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Roosevelts come to Oyster Bay. Theodore Roosevelt was not the first member of his distinguished New York City family to discover the attractions of water and woods in Oyster Bay. The distinction belongs to his grandfather, Cornelius von Schack Roosevelt Sr., who is nicknamed CVS. A successful businessman who served as a director of the Chemical Bank of New York. He rented a summer home in the sleepy waterfront community settled by the English in 1653, about 28 miles east of Manhattan, and named after the adjacent bountiful body of water. It was sometime around the Civil War, but we don't know when they first came, said Elizabeth Roosevelt of Kovneck, whose great-grandfather and TR's father were brothers. The first documentation of the family's presence is a logbook from the D.R. Martin, a side-wheel steamboat that served Oyster Bay, in the collection of the Oyster Bay Historical Society, according to Oyster Bay town historian John Hammond. Not John Hammond of Jurassic Park, mind you, who has been researching the history of Kovneck with Elizabeth Roosevelt. A logbook entry on September 27, 1867, shows the vessel transported a wheelchair, commode, piano, and camp stool owned by Silas Weir Roosevelt, the eldest son of Cornelius von Schack, to Long Island. Theodore Roosevelt was born on October 27, 1858, one of four children, the second of four to be exact, of Theodore Roosevelt Sr., a well-to-do merchant and philanthropist, and his wife, Martha Bullock Roosevelt, in the family's Manhattan brownstone at 28 East 20th Street. It was demolished in 1916. It was recreated in 1923 by the Theodore Roosevelt Memorial Association and is now the Theodore Roosevelt Birthplace National Historic Site. TD, as he was nicknamed, was a sickly child. When he had an asthma attack, often in the middle of the night, his father would rush him to various places in the countryside, including Oyster Bay, to recover. His mother, nicknamed Mittie, wrote to her daughter Anna, nicknamed Bammy, on August 10, 1870. TD had an attack of asthma last Saturday night, and Papa took him to Oyster Bay, where he passed Monday night and Tuesday night. Of course, TD was in ecstatics of delight. After Cornelius von Schack Roosevelt died in Oyster Bay in 1871, his son, Silas Weir, is believed to have continued coming to Oyster Bay. Another son, James Alfred, is known to have maintained the tradition of renting or hiring a summer home in Oyster Bay. It was the house of Richard Irvin on the western edge of what is now the village of Oyster Bay Cove, just east of the Oyster Bay Business District. And in 1874, James's brother, Theodore Roosevelt Sr., whose family is believed to have stayed with Cornelius von Schack prior to his death, began renting in Oyster Bay to be close to relatives. Theodore was 15 when his parents first transported the family to Long Island after spending summers in New Jersey and along the Hudson River. They spent nearly 4 months at a house known as Tranquility on Cove Road in Oyster Bay Cove, just east of where Oyster Bay High School is now located. It featured tall, white columns of wide verandas, elements that should have made T.R.'s mother feel at home, having grown up in Georgia in a mansion of similar architectural style. Tranquility was owned by Smith Thompson Van Buren, a son of President Martin Van Buren. No offense, but who'd want to go around with a name like Smith Thompson Van Buren? The kid's gonna sound like a law firm. So in an interesting piece of political trivia, the the father of the 26th president rented from the son of the 8th president. Now that I didn't know. And that is an interesting piece of political trivia. Theodore Sr. joined the other Roosevelts as a member of the C1 Yacht Club of Oyster Bay, Long Island's oldest, founded in 1871. He rented Tranquility, sometimes spelled Tranquility with 2 L's, for 4 summers. After he died in February 1878, the family continued to come to Oyster Bay. But that summer, T.R. apparently could not bear to be at Tranquility without his father there and vacationed in Maine instead. The house was demolished around 1948. As he had as a small child, the teenage Theodore Roosevelt loved Oyster Bay and thrived there. The daily routine was a horseback ride led by his father, and afternoons on the water in rowboats or a sailboat, and visits to the other Roosevelt houses and exploration of the nearby countryside. Theodore Sr. also had the children put on theatrical productions. T.R. wrote later, "In the country we children ran barefoot much of the time. The seasons went by in a round of uninterrupted and enthralling pleasures, supervising the hay and the harvesting, picking apples, hunting frogs successfully and woodchucks unsuccessfully, gathering hickory nuts and chestnuts for sale to patient parents, building wigwams in the woods, and sometimes playing Indians in too realistic manner by staining ourselves, and incidentally our clothes, in liberal fashion with poke cherry juice." T.R.'s diary and letters from around 1870 are filled with references to spotting and shooting birds, and also rowing on Cold Spring Harbor and Long Island Sound. He continued to spend his summer vacations in Oyster Bay, even while a student at Harvard. He compiled notes on some of the birds of Oyster Bay, published in 1879 while on Long Island. These activities of his childhood, the exploration of forested hills on foot or horseback and waterways and shorelines by rowboat, and shooting specimens for his own taxidermy museum, would continue through his adult years at Sagamore Hill. Roosevelts had been renting in Oyster Bay for 2 decades before any of them bought property there. On November 19, 1880, James Alfred Roosevelt, great-grandfather of Elizabeth, the last Roosevelt living in Oyster Bay, bought 80 acres in Cove Neck from Daniel Kelsey Youngs for $250 an acre. So if that's, let me see. So that's $20,000. His house, known as Yellow Banks, was completed the next year. It still stands on property adjoining Sagamore Hill on Cove Neck Road, but is no longer owned by a Roosevelt. T.R.'s cousin, Dr. James West Roosevelt, purchased 4 acres along Oyster Bay Harbor adjacent to Yellow Banks and built a home he called Waldeck. Another cousin, William Emlyn Roosevelt, son of James Alfred, owned 79 acres that fronted on Cold Spring Harbor north of what would become Sagamore Hill. For Theodore Roosevelt, 1880 was a momentous year. He graduated from Harvard and married Alice Hathaway Lee of Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, the cousin of a classmate he had met in his junior year. The wedding was held in Brookline, Massachusetts, near her home, on October 27th, which was also T.R.'s 22nd birthday. The newlyweds spent their 2-week honeymoon at Tranquility and soon purchased property nearby for themselves and the large family he envisioned. To be continued.